Come on down. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Gonna end the show. I did like that idea, Mr. Tom Morris. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Turn this all around here.
I like that idea, Tom. By the way, the memos. What was it? Philosophy as told through a series of memos.
Write a philosophy book just as memos. Yeah. Okay. after 30 ways of trying it another way, maybe that'll work.
I love that. I love that. I'm not smart enough to do that, but I'd love to edit it.
Well, you may have a deal. You may have a deal. Hey, great show. A lot of good stuff, Josh. And I just loved you talking about your love of writing and how much that just enhances your life. I mean, isn't it sad that so many people don't have that experience with their work?
Everyone has something that thrills them. And I think about, if you don't want to get into psychology, I think about Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, the psychologist who talks about flow. When I am writing, I'm applying expertise to a difficult problem, and it's the right level of difficulty, which is what you need for flow. And you get into this state where you're just doing what you need to do. And then you look up and 2 hours have gone by. You're like, wow, how did I do that? And for some people, that's composing music. For some people, it is, it's running or skiing. Not everybody is going to get into a flow state when they're writing, because not everybody is comfortable enough and experienced enough to do that. But everyone has some ability to do that, and creativity is often at the center of it.
You're right. I mean, the author you allude to, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi,
yes,
his work on that was really important to me and helped me understand. A few years ago, I wrote 8 novels in just a frenzy in 5 years. It was as if I were seeing a movie in my head. Yeah. And sometimes I would write for 6 to 7 hours and think I'd been writing an hour. So it's exactly that kind of what the poet Donald Hall calls absorbedness. This complete, it's almost your ego disappears. You become one with the work you're doing, and you no longer have an index for time to be registered mentally. It's a wonderful experience, and my very best work has come like that my entire life. So yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Cool.
I had a similar experience with that, building an airplane. I designed and built an airplane. Didn't know how to run a machine to machine parts or anything like that. And a friend of mine taught me in his, actually it was Dan Wesson from Smith & Wesson fame, the gun manufacturers. And he taught me how to run the machines and sort of looked over to my shoulder to make sure that engineering wise, everything was okay. But other than that, I remember getting there at 6 o'clock at night and looking up at the clock again. It was 2:30 in the morning. And I was just so absorbed with that experience. I did experience it as if I was one with what I was doing. It was very cool. It was very cool.
Now, you were building an airplane, so hopefully the flow experience didn't lead to a crash experience. What was the net result of all that?
I don't know. Can I share anything? No. Okay.
He's still here, Tom, so it obviously worked.
That's true, right? Maybe he was also building a parachute at the same time. I don't know. He didn't.
Actually, it's funny you mentioned that, and I don't want to get off too much on a tangent. I just wanted to acknowledge that flow experience. I had it again writing my father's obituary.
Wow.
It was like an hour and a half of just being by myself with literally a pen and paper, and it just. I felt more like a scribe than I did an author, Wow. It was really an amazing experience. And I was really lucky to have had a pretty intimate memorial service for him. And a number of people commented to me privately how much it touched them and how much it really spoke of my father. So I've always been really proud of that, but I've also felt a little bit of, where exactly did that come from?
Yeah.
So
Well,
Elizabeth Gilbert has a good book about it.
Who does?
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's so interesting, this beautiful conversation about flow, because the opposite of flow is the the cliched writer's block.
Right.
And and I think about my own journey. I always talk about how when I wrote Life After the 30-Second Spot and even joined the conversation, it was at a time when there was no Wi-Fi, when quite frankly there were no smartphones when I wrote the first book. And I would get on the plane. I was flying a lot, and I had the one thing that everybody coveted. I had a second battery for my Dell or my Sony, and I would write until that light was blinking, and I would save every single sentence because I didn't want to lose a word or a phrase, because you know how awful that is when you lose something, your creative process, until eventually the computer would switch off, and then I would switch over to the next battery and keep writing. And now I'm struggling, and I've always written in flow. I've always written to the point where I'll say in my books, this is just a giant op-ed. Don't expect research and facts and structure and stuff that Josh Bernoff, because you're going to get this chaos with me. You're just going to get to feel what I'm feeling and be a part of me. And now I'm struggling. I'm thinking, I don't know that I can write a sixth book. I don't know that I can have the discipline to be able to sit down. I've done two things that have been different for me. One is I write a soliloquy every single day, as you guys know, of 350 to 400 words. But the other thing, what I've realized, and I certainly took this away from this conversation, Josh, is that the next book I write will not be like the 5 books before it. It will be a different book. For me, I think it's going to be how I reinvented myself during a global pandemic. So it will be a story. It will be a very different kind of writing for me, a departure from, but that's what I need right now to stay in flow, to use your phrase.
Well, 60% of this is written as blog posts.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's one way to do it. And if you're writing these soliloquies, then you may have the raw material you need.
Yeah. That's right. And I think Joseph is probably on the highest learning curve of your life. Joseph, I'm guessing that. But look at the guests you're learning from every day, like Josh. I mean,
you're referring to Joey DeMont when you say Joseph, by the way.
Yeah. No, but just think how many people have the experience you have of being with guests with different expertise 5 days a week.
Yeah.
And to be able to immerse yourself in their ideas and their experiences, and then come to this after show for us bunch of wise guys to kind of shred it and chop it up. And you're going to have, your next book is going to be spectacular. Yeah. I mean, I've seen your writing style. I don't know if you saw in the comments, I said my favorite course evaluation from a Notre Dame student in my 15 years there was that she said it wasn't like a class at all. It was just like a conversation, but with a very talkative person. And
who was that?
Your book is like that. It's like a great conversation with a very talkative.
I know
person.
I am, but what are you?
Yeah, don't hire me as your editor. I'll take away all your parentheses.
Never. You know what I'll do with you is I'll negotiate. So I'll do like 4 parentheses on top of one another, so you can take away 3 and leave me with 1.
Josh, I just want to say this was so cool on so many fronts. I loved your discussions around social media to start with. I thought that was great.
Yeah.
I also am very happy that you understand flow and that that's a piece of your life. I did experience flow when I wrote my book, no questions, over the years. I just finished it, but I hated most of it. It was the worst experience. And it wasn't getting the stuff out. It was exactly what you're talking about as far as getting rid of it. So my brother, who was my co-author on my memoir, is a trained writer. He has a master's degree in English composition and rhetoric. He was on Law Review. He teaches legal reasoning and writing in law school. So this is someone who understands what you understand, which is cadence and timing and pacing and sentence fidelity. And he would actually read my stuff on the weekends while I wrote during the week. And then he would sit on the couch and sometimes he would stand up and he would say, "Do you hate the reader?"
Never a good start, never a good sign.
No, and he's not that my brother's not, melodramatic, but I was like, well, no. And he was, well, then you can't write like this.
I just have to share this, which is I edited a book written by a brilliant person named James McQuivey. And in contrast to the other books that I worked on, his was very much a stream of consciousness writing. And so he'd write these chapters and he'd turn them over to me and I'd be like, oh my God, look at all this crap. This is all about you. Nobody really cares. And I'd cross out these whole sections. And then I looked at the rest of it. I'm like, this is brilliant. All we have to do is take out the crap and what remains is excellent. And the first time I sent it back to him, like, you can't do this, this is the wrong way. But then I realized, no, we were going to have a really productive relationship. He was going to spew all this stuff out. I was going to cross out what didn't belong. And what was left was a great book. So that ended up working out pretty well.
Well, maybe that comes back to what you were saying, which is this idea of is you need the consistency to be able to identify the exceptional or the exceptions to the norm. Or in this case, you needed the consistent crap in order to uncover the nuggets.
I have to say, so I actually have written about this and watched it. There are two ways to write. And I learned from my son, who writes fiction as a hobby, that there's a name for them. There's one group of people who carefully plan out what's going to happen. This is going to be this and that. They write this detailed outline with a bunch of stuff in it. And then when that's all assembled, then they go and they write from beginning to end and nothing gets in their way. The second way to write is to someone just spews stuff out and you end up with a shitty first draft and then you go in and you edit it. And they're really not that different because the person who's making the detailed outline with all this, that's not that different from the shitty first draft. But in fiction, they're called planners and pantsers. A planner is somebody who does all that, this is exactly what's going to happen in what order. And a pantser writes by the seat of their pants. And I had to learn that pantsers, that's one way to do it. But that doesn't mean that first draft is actually the thing you should publish.
I'm a pantser. The only problem is I stopped at the shitty. No one told me I had to do something with the shitty first draft. So
that's fun.
Now he tells me.
That's Anne Lamott's phrase. I stole that.
Yeah. Josh, I was so in all seriousness, I was so disappointed with Wiley, with the relationship, because I was really hoping for that. I was really hoping.
No. Okay, two things. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but two things. Yeah. First of all, publishers don't do that. They used to. They don't do that anymore. You need a
I thought they did.
Editor. Number two, Wiley sucks. So even compared to other publishers, Wiley is worse.
Yeah.
Wiley is basically a custom publisher, a hybrid publisher.
But I will say what I'm referring to is the relationship. I got a book deal, Life After the 30-Second Spot. That was a book deal when it actually meant something. When you actually wrote the proposal and it got pitched and it was an Adweek book. This is circa 2003, 2004. You didn't need a Twitter account to get a book deal or buy a certain number of copies. And I guess I was looking for that because, one thing I think we've all recognized is every time you review a draft, it can always be tighter. It can always be better. It can always. And that's scary when you are a pantser like I am.
No, just get an editor. That doesn't work for Wiley because the Wiley editor is not going to put the time in. So
what if they're a Wiley? But if they're a Wiley editor that doesn't work for Wiley, that's what you want, right?
No. If Wiley is an adjective as opposed to a proper noun, I guess that's okay.
Josh, a good point here that we often forget about is the powerful role that editors have played in the history of literature, especially modern literature, like Thomas Wolfe's editor, Maxwell Perkins, I guess was his name, right? Apparently Thomas Wolfe would just disgorge mountains of stuff, you know, and Perkins would just, like you were saying earlier, just sort through it. You can't do this, you can't do that. And then what resulted was still huge books for the most part, but books that had a giant impact, you know. And I guess this was a bigger thing in the past, that the editors who actually worked at the publishing houses.
That was the way it used to be.
Yeah.
There were fewer books published, and the editors could spend more time on it. There are now fewer people working for the publishing companies, and more books coming out. So do the math, right? They don't have the time. When I didn't have an editor on Writing Without Bullshit. I mean, I had a person at the publishing company, and they only had one comment, which I addressed. And who knows? I mean, I guess I'm lucky it came out okay, but this next book I'm working on will have an editor because I need one just like anybody else.
Yeah, you can't write a book that says Writing Without Bullshit and have a bunch of bullshit in there. So you
well,
but you're right,
it doesn't happen.
External, even a master editor like you presumably are, you need a second voice. You need an external opinion for sure. You know. Well,
the editors. It's funny because people say, "Is the editor's job to be like a super writer?" And I'm like, no. The editor's job is to be like a super audience.
Yeah.
Okay, because if you take your shitty first draft and put it in front of a random reader, they're going to be like, "This sucks." The editor's going to say, "Oh, this sucks, but I know why it sucks. I know how to fix it so it doesn't suck anymore."
Right.
So that's what an editor does.
It's and people who criticize editors and say, if he knows so much about writing, why isn't he a best-selling author? That's like thinking an NBA coach should be able to outdunk all his players, right? I mean, to coach is a different thing from being in the game, and the best guys in the game still need a good coach.
Yes. And that doesn't mean the coach can do what the players can do either.
Absolutely. Right?
I could not write most of these books that I'm editing. There's no way I could do that. But I can look at it and say, oh, you're really smart, but something's getting in the way of people recognizing where your brilliance is coming from.
And it flows the other way too. There are a lot of great players in every sport who just make terrible coaches, because to do it is one thing, to conceptualize how they did it is another skill.
Absolutely.
Hey Josh, I have a question for you. You spoke about timing and, you know, writing the book Groundswell, right place, right time, but also the name became synonymous, just like The Tipping Point. It became almost, you know, even to a lesser degree, more geeky, The Wisdom of Crowds, The Experience Economy. How much of that is luck versus absolutely deliberately planned, that, you know, that you were, you know, because I mean, it's hard for me to believe that you and Charlene just got lucky.
Okay, so first I'm going to address the last thing you said about whether we got lucky. I've written 6 books and edited a bunch of other ones, and they were all really good, but only one of them became a bestseller, and that's because of the timing. So I wouldn't say that the other books were less good than this book. It's not a question of quality, but good is not sufficient. You also need to get lucky as well. If you're lucky and you write a bad book, it won't succeed. Lucky is not anywhere near enough all by itself. So I learned we did get lucky in that was my first book, and Charlene and I chose exactly the right topic at the right time. But I have carefully tried to cultivate that. Now, a couple of other co-authors and I wrote this book on mobile. It came out in 2013. That was exactly the right time, but didn't quite catch on in the same way. Sometimes that doesn't work. I want to address what you said about the title. That's a thing I work with authors on. I actually do this session called an idea development session, where we look at titles. And the way you do that is you ask the author to talk about their book, and then I usually have a third person in there who's like a member of the, they've chosen somebody they trust who's like a member of the audience. So they're explaining the book, and I'm listening for words that are unusual and interesting. And that then we start riffing off of those words. And in the case of Groundswell, what happened is that that was the first time I did anything like that. Charlene and I sat down, we had a computer connected to a projector, and we started typing what was going to be like the flap copy for the book. And we wrote a sentence that had the word groundswell in it. And I was like, that's an interesting word. So that's how that title ended up.
That's so interesting to me. It's almost like Nate Woodbury, who was on the show last week, who's a YouTube producer. He basically said, you don't do the SEO after you've created the video, the piece of video. Yeah. You actually plan the video around the SEO. And
that sounds like a really terrible idea.
Huh? Well, and that's how you end up with a channel with 1 million subscribers versus a couple of hundred. But the other thing that you were saying, which is an interesting connection, is in the title doesn't come first, and then you write the book. You're having the conversation. The title for the book is inside the content and the conversation.
Sometimes the title comes first, but this is the trick, is to get people to talk and find out what's unique about what they say. And then there's another element of it. I use two very sophisticated tools, Word Hippo, which is a thesaurus, and the universal search engine for book titles, which is called Amazon.com. Sounds like
wait, how do you spell that? Hold on. How do you spell that? Amazing.
Yes. Stephen, did you have something you wanted to say?
Break up, yes, Amazon. Actually, what are you saying?
I wanted to ask you. You said you had 6 books, and one of them was the bestseller. Was the bestseller an edited version? Now you're supposed to say that's a good question.
Oh, it is an interesting question. As Joe mentioned, the things have changed in publishing. So at the time we wrote Groundswell, which was published in 2008, editors at publishing companies still did work. And our editor at Harvard Business Press, a woman named Jackie Murphy, certainly had some feedback on that book. So we did get some feedback. But it's funny, even 2 years later, when we did our second book with the same editor, her feedback was, it was me and a different co-author, but her feedback was cut 10,000 words.
Didn't matter which ones, right?
Wow, that was like, I'm like, okay.
Wow.
But I didn't consider that to be useful feedback. It was certainly an instruction that we could follow. And my co-author and I were like, okay, what don't we need? I mostly cut his stuff because that was the part that needed to get cut. But that's not an editorial comment. That's a comment about not wanting to print a book that has too many pages in it.
That's lazy.
The title thing, I've sometimes had I learned early on, I had a book that was called, I thought it was going to be a big book, and I called it Reinventing Corporate Spirit. It was at a time in the mid-90s when everybody was talking about re-engineering the corporation. They were talking about product quality, process efficiency, but nobody was talking about the spirit of the people who do the work. So I was calling my book Reinventing Corporate Spirit, and a president of a company read it in draft, and he said, I really love this book, but the title's awful. And I said, really, why? He said, you got to have something catchy. You got to have something like, I don't know, if Aristotle ran General Motors. And I said, that's not a bad idea. That became my title. And half the CEOs who tell me they've got my book behind them on their shelf, they say they bought it because of the title. Now, I've come to learn the opposite thing with other authors who have a great title, and I buy their book because of the title. If the content doesn't match up to the cleverness or insightfulness or surprise value of the title, I end up really, really disappointed.
Then you have McDonald's. That's no.
The YouTube guy that was here the other day, Joseph, what's his name again?
Nate.
So Nate spoke of that, saying, because I asked him, I said, I have hundreds of videos that I've shot through the years. Can I just retitle them to make it work with this formula that he has? And you really can't. I mean, it's if you don't come through with the goods in the content, but you change the title to get people to see your stuff, it just doesn't work that way.
One of the jokes I make with people when I'm talking about titles is, so the title has to have two qualities. It has to fit the book, and it has to be interesting by itself. Right. And I'm like, what happens if you don't do both of them? Then I'm like, okay, the title of my next book is Naked Pictures of Kim Kardashian.
Right. I mean, I'd buy it.
And people will buy it, but then they're like, wait, this doesn't actually have naked pictures of Kim Kardashian in it. I'm disappointed. Yeah. So that's the challenge, is it has to match.
My kind of acid test, which is somewhere in the middle, is, and this is where Groundswell certainly fits in, like the tipping point. Just in the title, in one word, in two words, doesn't matter how long the title is, you've got the entire book. You literally don't even have to open up the book to know what the book is about and be able to take away something useful from the book.
I'm going to push back on that for a second, because when you say that, what happens is when a book becomes successful with that title, what does a tipping point mean? It doesn't actually mean anything. But you heard about it, and then you read the book, and then you're like, I connect the title, The Tipping Point, with what I read about it. And then you can talk about that. And at that point, the tipping point actually starts to mean something. So a title is like a name. It's like a handle, and it has to relate to the book, but it can't tell you the whole thing. In very rare situations, you can get that. But in most cases, it needs to remind you of the content in the book.
Oh, sure.
Actually.
Well, I mean, obviously, I'm not advocating that there's nothing in the book, but what I would add is the thing about, like what Tom was saying, is that book sits behind you on your bookshelf, and you look smart because you've got it as well. It wasn't just the CEO that bought the book. Of course, the content is fantastic. It's Tom Morris, for God's sake. It's a double PhD from Yale. He's no Josh Bernoff, but he's pretty damn close.
Can we call you Dr. Morris then?
Hey, I don't want an op-ed written about me, so let's just stay away from that.
Should I call you Dr. Morris? I'm going to call you Dr.
No, it's the
Doc
subtitle
Morris.
That tells you what the book is about.
Yeah.
Tom, did you? Yes. But you didn't take notes today, though.
Oh, I took a lot of notes today. Yeah, I got a ton of notes today. I got read in the margin, all kinds of things.
Paper.
But I was so fascinated.
That's my prompt for him to show you.
But 3 times I've gotten so interested, I forgot to tell notes. And Josh, one more thing that we haven't brought up yet: a title can fail you in more than one way. I did a book about Harry Potter called Harry Potter and the Meaning of Life. And all the Harry Potter fans were so excited that this was going to be a book. I spoke at Potter World, where thousands of people in Las Vegas wearing long robes and carrying wands, and got a standing ovation. And then Doubleday got hold of the book. Their chief business editor said, "Oh, but we wish we had done your book if Aristotle ran General Motors. So could you, this is my favorite leadership book I've ever seen. It's got to have a business title. It can't be called In the Meaning of Life. You got to parallel your earlier really successful book. Let's call it If Harry Potter Ran Something. Pick a company to bounce off." And he was offering me enough money. I said, okay, I'll do that. And it became If Harry Potter Ran General Electric. And you know what the result was? The Harry Potter people saw the title and assumed, oh, this is a business guy trying to benefit off Harry Potter. We're not going to support this. And all the business guys thought, well, this is bound to be fluff. And so the two audiences they thought they could get with the book, it basically, the sales were pretty disappointing on that book because neither crowd trusted the title.
Interesting, because you got completely in limbo. You were trapped in the middle. You try to be all things to all people. And by the way, what made The Tipping Point so brilliant is the book reads like a general interest book, but it's a business book.
Yeah.
You read the story of, what was it, Sesame Street and Hush Puppies, and you're like, oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting anecdote. That's an interesting story. But it's actually it is the quintessential wolf in sheep's clothing. It is a sneaky, sneaky book.
And one of the things about Built to Suck I like so much, you guys, I'm reading Built to Suck, and I'm just having too much fun with it. But one of the things I like about it is the great little nuggets, the great little story nuggets, little factoids here or there that I say, oh, really? And I want to go tell somebody. This little story that Joseph tells to make his bigger points. The so much of the value is in these little stories, and you've even got photographs in there that I want to show to people. And so many of the best-selling books in the recent past, the guys have been great storytellers. And sometimes it becomes to a fault. You forget the point they're trying to make, or you totally lose track because you're so immersed in all these great stories they're telling. And they're not good enough at saying, okay, here's my point, here's my conclusion. In fact, some people have said that Gladwell, that's his weakness. He's a great storyteller.
That is absolutely the case.
He's a great storyteller.
But his weakness is drawing the right conclusion from the story.
No. He is all story and fairly weak on argumentation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And people who say, I want to write like Malcolm Gladwell, two things. First of all, you can't. That's like saying, I want to dance like Misty Copeland. I'm sure you do, but you can't. And the second is, if you actually start to have the magic disappear and you look at what he's saying, you're like, you know what, he's wrong.
Yeah,
he's and I love the 10,000 hour thing that he wrote. The people who actually did the original research were like, oh, actually Malcolm Gladwell got what we wrote completely wrong.
Well, and it's so interesting because I'll just say one final point, because I know we're just after 30 minutes, and me, I try and stay consistent on this. Is that I think there's a consistency inside. There's like an inter and an intra consistency, because ultimately what we're all trying to do is we're trying to create the four dummies, right? The formula of if philosopher ran corporation is brilliant. I mean, it should scale. There should be 100 books in the series, and there should be. There's no reason why there shouldn't be. The same thing like like the versus for dummies, where it ends up being like a cut and paste franchise. Who knows what works? With Gladwell, I think his approach of oversimplified wolf in sheep's clothing didn't exactly translate into the success of The Tipping Point. And I think, to Josh's point, he didn't go out and try and create Groundswell 2, 3, 4, 5 and the next 7. He completely also just took a different direction.
I did write a sequel and it didn't do very well.
What was the title?
It's called, it's interesting that you mentioned the title. So that was a case where we had 8 different people, any of whom could say no to the title. Yeah. And the editor at Harvard Business Press was like, you have to have a one-word title, which is bullshit.
No.
What was it called?
It was called Empowered. It was published in 2010. And it was a sequel. It wasn't as good as the original, and it didn't sell very well.
Huh.
Josh, one question for you as an accomplished author. Do you have, I'm sure you do, what is your opinion of how writing has changed, specific to the audience being, in advertising, we always call it short attention span theater, right? Yeah. We have a very short amount of time to get our audience to engage. Has writing changed in that sense, with maybe, Malcolm Gladwell as an example, but, I think like Michael Lewis, to me, is a much better writer, as a storyteller, and he gets his facts right.
Yes.
Is it more advantageous today to have a shorter, concise, brief 200-page book versus a 400-page book?
Yeah. Okay.
Because of the audience?
Yeah. Let me answer that very specifically. There is a very small number of people who can write books that are entertaining, even though they're nonfiction books, and that people just want to read. And they can write as long as they want, because that's no different from a novel. Right. Because you keep turning the page because you're like, wow, this is fascinating. The rest of us, poor slobs, are writing books that are attempting to be helpful.
Right.
You know, here's how to do social media properly. Here's a different way to think about writing and blah, 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 blah. And those books have gotten shorter.
Yes.
So that used to be 65,000 words. Now we're down to probably like 45,000 words is an ideal length for a book like that.
Okay.
And it's related to the short attention span theater. My agent used to talk about this phenomenon. He'd say, the book can't be longer than 250 pages. And I said, why not? And he said, because then people start to read it and then it ends up on next to the bedside on Guilt Mountain. And we all have Guilt Mountain next to the bedside. So you're immediately like, oh man, I don't want to end up on Guilt Mountain.
That's great. Thank you.
Guilt Mountain. You know, just final point, Joey, I think we've seen that also with keynotes. That, you know, more and more, Tom, you've probably found this as well, that you're being booked for 15-minute presentations and 17-minute presentations and 18, and you almost like saying, I feel like I'm stealing your money. Like,
that's the TED influence.
That's TED Talk, yeah.
I'm going to tell you one thing which I can't resist sharing in that context. I once spoke at a conference. And they told everyone that they had to talk for 20 minutes. And I was like, that's shorter than I usually do. So I created a short version of my talk. And there was a guy at the conference whose topic was brevity. And I'm like, this is really interesting. I want to hear what this guy has to say. And then I looked and he has a 45-minute time slot. And I said to the people running the conference, I said, why has that happen? And they're like, he insisted that he had to have 45 minutes. He couldn't do it in 20 minutes. And I'm like, okay, this guy's full of crap. And sure enough, when he got on stage, he was full of crap.
Oh, that's great.
That's brilliant. The irony. Josh, thank you. Thanks for your time today. This was
very generous, Josh. Thank you so much.
It's been really fun to talk to you all.
And I will be in touch. I'll send you an email with the links and the files and everything. And I'm gonna have to beat it out of you one day. One day you'll have to tell us who that famous politician was.
I hope that something positive will happen, and if it does, I'll be able to tell you. I almost fell off. I ran down to my wife's studio. She's an artist, and I'm like, "Guess who I just heard from?" So sorry to be.
You're like oh my God, Anthony Scaramucci just DM'd me.
Not really. Okay. Thanks, Joseph. It's been great to talk to you.
Great.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
See you guys tomorrow.